We made this.
Hello everyone and welcome to yet another edition of Pick a Disc. I am your host Matt Latham, and as always this is the podcast where someone picks a disc to talk about for whatever reason they want to. And today I'm proud to bring on Jonny Taylor from the band The Horn, Montreal Road, and all sorts of other different places and projects and stuff to talk about Graceland by Paul Simon. And we talk, as usual, we talk about the songs and the lyrics and his origin stories with the band, but we also dip into a bit into African music and world music and such. But before I do that, as always, I just want to say follow us on all the Instagrams and all the Twitters and all the Facebooks and all the threads and all the Discords and all the stuff that you usually find with all these kind of podcasts do nowadays. Just follow us on social medias under Pick a Disc. We're usually there. As I said, there's a Discord server, so if you want to come in, say hello by clicking on that link. And just before we move on and go and listen to the interview, I just want to say thank you for listening for 2023. So what's going to happen is in January there's going to be an episode a week because it's going to be 5 years of the podcast in January. So we're going to have a Matt pick for episode 130, which is the next episode, which is the 2nd of January. But that's going to be a special one because I'm not going to be on that one. It's going to be Mark and Colin. The week after, it's going to be a special bonus episode where I'm going to be talking about songs I want to talk about, but perhaps are not on albums or anything that I'll probably get the chance to talk about on the podcast. There's a few other episodes as well as a potential crossover to celebrate the fact that the We Made This Podcast Network is 5 years old, because we're more or less the same age. So yeah, there's all this exciting stuff. So January is going to be an absolute hellscape for me in terms of the workload that I'm doing to myself, but I've proud of this podcast. I'm so glad that I've reached 5 years. So you've got an excellent January to look forward to. I hope. I just need to make sure that the quality is good. But, do you want to talk about good quality? Go and listen to the interview that we're about to play, because I spoke to Jonny about Paul Simon, and it's an amazing interview. So, yeah, before we get to the birthday celebrations, let's talk to Jonny. Okay, in the latest edition of things that I thought was a good idea and then I realised it's not good audio content because it's an audio medium, it's another edition of looking at the guest's background. And this is the first time that I think I've had a guest record from a kitchen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Matt, thank you very much for having me on. Exactly. This is actually my living area with kitchen in the background.
Oh, okay.
So it's what happens when you move to Hackney and don't have enough money.
Okay. Yeah, so we got live from Hackney. We have Jonny Taylor from many different projects, including recently The Horn and acting and all sorts of a CV that I can only dream of. So, how you doing, Jonny? Hey.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. First of all, I had a quick peek beforehand, and it looks great. And it's so nice. It's so refreshing to see a show and as you said before when we were off air, just to talk about music for music and not necessarily with any ulterior motives. So yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you once again for having me.
No, pleasure's all mine. I'm just glad you've donated. I was going to say an hour, but just in case we end up going like going on for hours and hours, which hopefully we shouldn't do. We're here to talk. We're here to talk about music, and as the premise of the show says, you're here to pick a disc or an album to talk about. So, Jonny, why don't you tell the lovely listeners the disc that you've picked for us to talk about today?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Well, today I have chosen Graceland by Paul Simon.
And why have you picked Graceland?
It's a question with many answers. I would say that to sort of to try and give you like a sense of my connection to it. I think it's probably when I was growing up with two younger brothers. In fact, I'm the eldest of three, and we were in a car, like always going to sort of France or Italy in the car with Dad, and it would be like it was a Volkswagen Golf. He couldn't really afford anything more than that, but we just did it. We just did the ferry each time. and we had literally two cassettes at the time in the car, and one was Tracy Chapman and one was Paul Simon. So actually, I was torn between Tracy Chapman and Paul Simon. I went on to really, really kind of love Paul Simon as well as Tracy Chapman, but I sort of could have picked. I could have picked Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones. I could have picked the Essential Collection by Tracy Chapman, or I could have picked Paul Simon, or I could have picked any number of other records by Steely Dan, or like. But Paul Simon, Graceland, it's a sort of album where I hadn't even liked it on Spotify because it's so deep in my psyche from when I was about, I would say, 8 years old, that I would be able to sing you, if the album was on, with the help of the album, I'd be able to sing all the lyrics. And it's so rare that we have that now. I mean, I'm 36 now, and I should have kind of picked it without hesitation, because it's so beautifully recorded, it's so beautifully written, and it symbolizes so many different wonderful relationships within one record. And apart from being, as you were saying before, like we could sort of frame it as his comeback record, but I feel like it's just such a beautiful accomplishment of, apart from having just so much nostalgia attached to it. So I'm completely biased in that sense. But it was just the sort of soundtrack to my childhood. And I think now I listen to it, they say sort of 20 minutes of music you know and love is proven to raise your mood. So thanks for having me on to talk about Graceland. I appreciate that from a selfish point of view. My mood has already risen. But yeah, I think that it was definitely just like a knee-jerk reaction when I was asked to talk about my favorite record. And I think also it's one of those situations where, and you'll remember this too, Matt, which is that feeling of listening to an album and knowing exactly which track is next, or not even maybe even knowing the name of the track, but you know which sound is next. And if someone were to, in the night, sneak a new song that comes next, you'd instantly notice. You know, like it's like it's you, and you don't need Spotify or Instagram or anything to tell you any of this. It's just built into your long-term memory. And so it's a deeply ornamental and active sort of pulse through my life. And the lyrics are absolutely astonishingly good, and his collaboration with Lady McCloud. But there's so many there's sort of like a water full of reasons after that, but initially it's that nostalgia is probably the main reason.
So it's an album that kind of you liken to kind of childhood and those memories of like driving in the car.
Yeah, like really simple. Just the road ahead.
Yeah. So was
really
that
simple?
So was that the first time that you heard the album then? So it was like just because you hadn't a choice, it was just what was on the.
Yeah, it was literally just on a cassette tape. Yeah, in the car.
Okay.
Yeah. Dad bought it.
Okay. So and was that your intro to Paul Simon? So was that the first time you remember like hearing Paul Simon? And
yeah, just that first intro, boiling the bubble. That's sort of the beginning of the car journey kind of thing, you know.
Okay. So was your dad much a fan of Paul Simon then, or do you know why it was just those two cassettes, or was he?
Yeah, he loved Springsteen, Dylan, quite a few others. John Denver, John Martin. He would listen to like a lot of male singer-songwriters.
Okay.
But to be fair, he did introduce us to Tracy Chapman, and through her, I also discovered other artists from other walks of life, and Stevie Wonder. And so I did like how our parents gave us a kind of a cultural audio upbringing, and not just, you know, white American music or white English music. There were other sort of sounds going on as well. And
quite. I'll make a note to try and get back to that frame of thought you were saying, particularly when you was on about the kind of the white American music, particularly when we talk about Graceland as an album. But before we get back to that, I'm kind of going back to your personal kind of like musical journey. So as you get older, and I think as you get older and like you start getting pocket money and you start to kind of discover music and be able to buy your own music, was you kind of still kind of focused on things that sounded like Paul Simon, or did you
Yes,
or
I
was you
love that.
kind of or was your kind of music taste like evolving separately, or did you always feel there was an influence on Paul Simon on the music taste you was having as you become a teenager?
That's a really good question. I think that Paul Simon has had an influence on the music that I've written. And we said we weren't going to talk about that. And so I'll just close that book immediately. But your question was, does it have influence on the music that I then listened to? And I'd say probably not. I think it was a record that I came back to remind myself of what I deemed to be good music. Because I went to school and was flooded with all kinds of awesome acts. But like, Linkin Park, Limp Bizkit, Eminem, Ludacris, Snoop Dogg, Pharrell, Craig David. I listened to a lot of garage, I listened to a lot of and so that sort of, then Graceland was just sort of smirking at me from a corner by the time I was 14, because I'd listened to such a rich and important record, which I didn't realize how culturally important and richly important it is to just for someone to listen to Graceland and to disregard it. I'd be like, well, you obviously haven't listened to it properly. I'd be really snobby about it now and defend it to the hilt. But I think that I probably don't need to fight that battle very often. I'm sure people who listen to Graceland can recognize that even, that it is just very beautifully recorded music at worst, you know. Yeah, I think, like you just go to school and you meet girls and you just go fall in love and you get your heart broken. You listen to Stained and Nickelback and everything just you start to compartmentalize different music based on your memories, right? So I think that it didn't. I think Paul Simon's Graceland and Still Crazy After These, they sort of have a special, different place in my heart. I keep them quite separate from other bands. I think it's like quite a personal thing. I don't really reference him very much when I'm writing, or I don't really anymore. I probably did, but I think it subconsciously influences the way that I actually sing. Like Paul Simon's voice literally it influences the way that I perform and write, but I don't consciously reference that album. It's just sort of something that I like to keep for me and me. It's sort of it's the only. I'm pretty open about talking about lots of things about myself, but it's quite a personal thing to talk about Graceland. It's which is really nice.
I feel like I'm getting a scoop. So
yeah, it's breaking news. A guy
Yeah.
is opening up about Graceland.
Yeah, but I think if we go back to before we move to Graceland, for people listening who might not know who Paul Simon is, so long term listeners who who have been listening since 2020 might have already heard me say this, because we have covered Paul Simon on the podcast before. It is one of the episodes that got deleted by my host for reasons they still haven't gotten back to me.
Wow.
So unfortunately, but
mysterious.
yes, mysterious reasons. But back in June 2020, Ian Garfield picked Negotiations and Love Songs to talk about, which is a compilation album of pretty much most of his his solo work to date.
Yeah.
So, and part of that, there was 3 songs off this album that was part of that. So, so my kind of history with Paul Simon is that the only thing I've really listened to, apart from I think a couple of songs that were kind of in the zeitgeist at the time, so it's just that album that I'm familiar with. But then I kind of had a kind of very, very brief introduction to Graceland back then, but I never really listened to the album.
Yeah.
So and it has been about, and again, apart from one song of this album, that I did talk about on the previous episode, a lot of this I'm coming in quite fresh, so I never really listened to this before. So
that's good. I think in that case, that's actually great, because I feel like you and I can learn something from each other, because I know Graceland more than any of his other records. And obviously bits of I Love Bookends, like the album with Simon Garfunkel. I know some of Simon Garfunkel's songs quite quite deeply. But Paul Simon as a solo artist, Hearts and Bones, it was a flop, wasn't it? And then but then Still Crazy, that song is my mum's favorite song, so I definitely heard about that. And there's some incredible lyrics from his solo stuff, and which sort of go unnoticed. But yeah, Graceland is the one that I think probably from a childhood biased standpoint, kind of nostalgic standpoint, stuck with me the most, and it's the one I'm most confident in talking about for sure.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm going to very, very, very brief. Paul Simon is a American singer songwriter and one of the probably most notable artists of pretty much the last century. Yeah, he was born in Newark, New Jersey on October 13th, 1941. He shares my birthday, October 13th.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
I love
not
that.
not the same year, but he's got about good 44 years ahead of me.
Yeah,
But yeah, so he was born in Newark, New Jersey on my birthday. Yeah,
love
and
that.
yeah, and was part of the duo Simon and Garfunkel, and then went to do his only solo stuff. Yeah, quite a lot of 60s kind of classics came from Simon Garfunkel.
Yeah,
Sound of Silence, Mrs. Robinson,
yeah,
there's loads and loads more. Any solo stuff he had like 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, and a load of others. And then you get to the 80s, and some of the interesting stuff that I remember reading about the first time, and is that he was kind of seen as a has been, particularly after the previous album, Hearts and Bones, and then his personal life had a shake up because he was married to Carrie Fisher at the
yeah.
time,
And
and he
that didn't work out.
yeah, yeah. So and then he was involved in a film. I think he did the soundtrack to a film which was seen as a flop, and I think a lot
Right.
of records, and from what I was reading, a lot of record executives kind of just wrote him off for saying like, oh yeah, he's the 70s. He shouldn't be. He's a novelty act now. He's going to be like a nostalgia act. He's just going to pop up,
Yeah,
like and sing like and go probably sing his solo stuff. Have a bunch of people shout "Sing Mrs. Robinson" to him at gigs, and then you probably won't hear from him again.
yeah. That must have
But
been quite bleak for him.
yeah, but what but reading into this as well as we start to talk about the album as a whole,
Yeah,
it meant that it meant that there wasn't really much of an eye on him, so he was kind of free to pretty much do what he
exactly.
wanted.
Yes, yes.
And
The hype had died down, and I think that's probably potentially part of the reason why he kind of flew the nest of his normal sort of collaborators.
yeah, I think, and I can't remember the name. I remember someone gave him a tape of kind of some Afrikaans music,
That's right.
and
Yeah,
then and he just listened to it, and then that kind of opened the well to
that's exactly
just
right.
yeah, and just opened the
Yeah,
well to this whole new world of kind of world music that he'd never really listened to before.
that's right. That's absolutely right, Matt. That's perfect because it's sort of that's where my notes sort of start. And like it, yeah, he I think I'm going to try and I'll embarrass myself with the pronunciation of these, but I've always seen as an adult that album as almost being like a celebration of his love of South Africa and South African music and Zulu music in particular. But like I think he apparently became obsessed with a cassette tape which had I think I'm going to try and pronounce this umbakwanga, and which is a style of Zulu music, and also discovered you and I were talking about linguistics earlier. There's a sound which in Afrikaans, which I think is like that. There's the Ladysmith Black Mombazo. They have a word attached to their harmonies, which is pronounced. I'm going to try this. Is it at the Maya harmonies, which there's no literal translation for, but I had to do some research before this to kind of get this right, because obviously, I don't want to get those kind of things wrong. But I think it loosely translates as a cappella, but with a sort of particular focus on the blend of voices. And they're both from Umbakwanga, and that one is they're both from Zulu music. But it's I think it derives from like this word derived from the Zulu verb, which is atama, which means walking softly or tread carefully. And just for those linguistics freaks out there, it's the sound, the sort of tut sound, like when you're tutting. It's in linguistics is called a tenuous click, which is voiceless. So it's like you put your tongue at the top roof of your mouth, going like kind of like you're tutting, like. And so, and I like that because I like to think, because I have no idea. I like to think though that Paul Simon may have just enjoyed the fact that he was able to maybe escape into a different world, or just kind of fall in love in a different way, like I have done. And like we may, I can't speak for you, but when I hear different music from other continents, it's like, oh wow, this is amazing. I get to hear like these sounds that are recorded from a long time ago, which are not, anything like listening to the Beatles or listening to Rolling Stones or something. It's like it's come from a community of people who are communicating with each other in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And I like to think that, and sorry, just following on from what you just said, and then I guess we could, there's a couple of things to say about Lilies with Black Mambazo as well, if you'll allow.
Yeah, feel free. Yeah, I'm here. I'm here to learn. So,
Well,
but
I just
yeah.
learned some stuff from you just then, because I'd sort of, you're refreshing as well about the Carrie Fisher stuff and the absolutely like that kind of trajectory. I think that's, hopefully we've given a good you've given a very nice the trajectory of his career. That's important to note, because I think he enjoyed so much, like with Bridge Over Troubled Water as well, like so hailed, and to kind of then go like to Hearts and Bones, the single is so good on the quote unquote flopped album. But if you listen back to that, it's actually beautifully done. But yeah, I was fascinated. I've seen Ladies with Black Mambazo. I saw them in Basingstoke at the Anvil a long time ago, my brother. And the guy, it's Joseph Shabalala, who formed the lead singer. And I believe that he had that type of harmony, that a cappella harmony I was mentioning before, with the tricky, at least for me, tricky word to say. I think he apparently had a dream about those harmonies and formed the band. And more research yielded that apparently Joseph Shabalala, he then entered Ladies with Black Mambazo into loads of, having sort of had this dream, he formed the band and then entered them into loads of these a cappella competitions in South Africa. But then eventually they did so many competitions and won so many, they were actually banned from the competitions for being too good. But they were like allowed to like come, apparently allowed to come. I remember learning that detail a long time ago, but it's a very nice sort of, I was just like, I love the idea that an a cappella group is so good that they're not allowed to come into the venue. Or at least I think they weren't allowed to compete. So obviously Paul Simon had kind of struck gold there and found like an incredible thing for his thing. But I'm sort of, teetering around this topic because it's obviously, there's a delicate aspect, as we both agreed, to the apartheid. So, but I think that for me, it's so, as a child, listening to the album, it was like this incredible burst of color and sounds that I had no preconceptions of or at all, and I had absolutely no idea about the apartheid. And now as an adult, I really view it as a real celebration of us just being one race, and not, it not being something that that should be, considered in any kind of hostile way. It's just Paul Simon just being with these incredible people and these incredible musicians and celebrating that.
I think
sorry. So that's what sort of from that angle, and looking at Ladies with Black Mambazo, it's a beautiful celebration of them on that album, which I think is super important. And I think Paul Simon did a wonderful thing there. It was a good move.
I think, as you alluded to as well, probably bring this up. As I was researching this, there's some fascinating, interesting stuff that was happening in terms of the story behind this album, and I think Paul Simon's role, and particularly going to South Africa. There's a lot of there's a whole depth of information and articles I was reading about that, and I think he come into conflict with, I think, artists against apartheid and stuff, and it's a delicate situation, and part of me I recommend reading into it, and part of me would love to kind of get into that, but I think, as me and Jonny were talking about beforehand, we're not really historians. I mean, don't feel as qualified to talk about aspects of of the story. But I encourage you to read about that section, because it's a very interesting story that's happening, and there's quite a lot of controversy about this album. We're not going to go too much into that, but I think, we kind of just need to just acknowledge it was there and it happened and stuff, and so, because there was a lot of controversy with this at the time, and and yeah, and if we delved into that, it'll be a 3 hour long podcast. But
Yeah.
yeah, we're not going to delve into that. I think I'm going to much more interested in what Johnny's kind of personal connection to the album. But I do recommend people go and listen. Go and read into that. There's quite a few articles. There's a Guardian article I was reading about which delves into that aspect of it a lot more. So yeah, please do go into that. But yeah, so I just thought I'd at least acknowledge that before we move on, just so in case anyone was wondering if we were going to talk about it. But we're not gonna go into detail. So yeah, so there are kind of a lot of kind of like it said African artists through that and artists from the different regions that I noticed, as well as some names from the personnel things that jump out to me. And I apologise in advance for mispronouncing any of these names, but
Oh, wow.
I think Bakithi Kamalo on the bass.
Yeah.
On the bass, like it was like a well known, very respected bass guitarist. It was like this is like kind of his debut into the world, like global kind of debut, and because of association with Paul Simon, there's a lot of really good bass on this. A name I never realised was on here until I just saw the name is Yusuf Nadur, who I only know because of the song 7 Seconds with Nana Cherry.
Nice. Yeah.
But
That's fair enough. That's a great reference.
Yeah, there's Linda Ronstadt, and he said Ladysmith, Blackman Zavo. The Everly Brothers are on here as well.
Yeah, the Everly Brothers are so cool that they were on that.
Yeah, just doing some additional vocals. There's a lot of work and a lot of people that have gone into this album.
It's a huge number of players. If you get the list up I've got the list up here on Wikipedia, and it's it's a good numbers, like good old 40, 50 people, just players alone, right?
Did this album like encourage you to listen to? I think you've mentioned Ladysmith, Black Mambazo, but was there any other kind of musicians or things on this album that you kind of like investigated or listened to independently from this?
To be honest with you, it really is standalone Graceland for me. And as I said to you before, I was then after the age of 8 was absolutely swamped with a whole load of other other artists, and I don't think I'm erudite enough to talk about the number of players on this album, and it's much more to do with kind of I think that the actual sort of effect that the album had on me, and we could go into. I mean, yeah, you had an extraordinary, like the bass line, which I mean in Graceland, it's almost like that's almost similar to like a kind of Cash like thing. And in fact, I think Paul Simon says in one audio interview, he says like it was almost like a kind of Johnny Cash type bass line, which is an extraordinary marrying. But I think it's the polyrhythms that you get from the percussion in this whole album that you wouldn't find necessarily in Europe at that time in the 80s. But if you go down to somewhere like South Africa, the polyrhythms and the way that the percussive elements play in, and you're looking at this list, it's just extraordinary. So yeah, I think he's not on this list, but I highly recommend people checking out Mahmoud Ahmed for a beautiful kind of, he's dead now, but he was an Ethiopian novelist, and then he turned later in his life to be a musician, and he's got a beautiful song called Tezeta, which means nostalgia, and that's one of my favorite tracks. But I think definitely I would say in general this album made me aware of the continent of Africa, and like just looking at different communities within Africa and what they yield. For example, there's a wonderful guy I know in London called Papis, who's from Senegal, and he was explaining to me how you have the djembe in a community and the djembe in his village in Senegal. I can't speak for other African villages, but this is from his brain. He was literally like, you would go out into the village, the square, and start playing your djembe, and it would mean that would be like back in the day before mobile phones. That would be a way of being like, is anyone around? Does anyone want to hang out? And then someone might, it's a beautiful thing, that the idea of that being a communication aspect, and then someone might bring out some other instrument and join in, and they might bring their djembe and I love that as a sort of and so yeah, I think that being aware of Graceland when I was 8 years old, I wasn't aware of any of the cultural or any of the names on the album, and had no idea about how many people were on there. But you can certainly hear there's a beautiful cacophony of so many different intricate, nuanced percussion going on, and there's accordion on there. There's like different types of saxophones on there. It's a real circus. But yeah, I think that it definitely opened my eyes up to a whole new world of music for sure.
Okay. So
So forgive the general answer there.
no, it's fine, But yeah, so I mean, I'm getting kind of like real kind of like love and interest in the kind of African kind of style of music,
Yeah,
from that area, or the cultural sound and stuff, and so, but is that still kind of
yeah,
linked to
that's
Graceland, or is that still kind of isolated to Graceland, or or have you seen have you actually investigated that a lot more? So have you found yourself, particularly if you're getting older, looking towards that kind of genre of music? Or
yeah, I do. There's some great, but I'm just finding you a playlist that me and my partner made of some Mali music, which will be interspersed with some Ethiopian artists. And I think like it's really beautiful to be able to explore, as I was saying to you before, like something that goes beyond the music you're fed in HMV, or the music that you're fed by going online. And it's like, oh, you live in this country, therefore you're going to like this music. Whereas because we have Spotify, we can go and encyclopedically discover new things, which is really exciting, I think.
yeah, I think there's something particularly, and I say I can only see vision that like Paul Simon, who's like a massive music fan, suddenly finding a whole world of music that he thought that he never knew existed.
Yes,
And
and
I think, to be
yes,
fair, I think that's still kind of the same now. I mean, through the podcast, through the podcast, particularly when we did the Shakira album, like there's a whole world, like the Latin kind of like, and
yeah,
Spanish
yeah, yeah, yeah,
charts and stuff, and
yeah.
well now the most popular genre in the world is K-pop. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's the biggest genre, and I
yeah.
think like, and because of
It's
the
huge.
internet, social media, TikTok, and everything, like the world's getting smaller, and people got much more access to all this stuff.
It's surely one of the best parts of the internet. I'm sorry to cut in here, Matt. I've that I've so many playlists on Spotify, but I found, yeah, for your lovely listeners, and thank you for tuning in. Boubacar Traore. So he's gone from being the voice of Mali to obscurity and bounced back to become an internationally respected singer, guitarist, and songwriter. Um, Born in Kayes in the sandy west of Mali, his passion as a boy was soccer, and his skills won him the nickname he still carries, Kaka, which is short for Kari Kari, meaning dribble. So he had famous for football initially, but then he really got into music. And yeah, his music dominates quite a lot of that playlist that I've got. And I've named that playlist Mali so that I know that, because a lot of those artists on there are from Mali. And then, yeah, I'd highly, as I've said before, Mahmoud Ahmed, who's from Ethiopia. And I remember when I first heard Tezata, again by Mahmoud Ahmed, that it really changed. I heard that quite later on in my life. You know, probably during lockdown, actually, I think it was only a couple of years ago. And I just remember thinking, oh, this is what music's supposed to sound like. It's just all of this. Like, I've got Ableton at home, like, and I make beats on it and use free plugins and synths and stuff, and fanning around like a kind of um, synth idiot. But then I like, you just like play something from this wonderful, from Mahmoud Ahmed, and it's like an oasis. It's like nothing's being recorded through like a Pro Tools or something. I don't think it sounds like it's gone straight into a tape machine, and it's just really, the players are so good. I think that's really important to come back to Graceland. That's really important to say, is that the players, the session players from South Africa and from various parts, because he recorded some of it in New York, the vocals and things like that. It's so the album sort of traveled around, I think, quite a few studios, 4 or 5 studios, with a guy called Roy Halley, I believe, engineering, and Paul Simon produced most of it. But it's like the sheer playing on that is so unbelievably, for one of a slightly less modern word, absolutely sick. It's just like it has like this place in my heart because of that as well. But I wonder if you'd like me to kind of go more and slightly deeper into the album itself.
Yeah, if you want to, if you've got anything that you want to either take the opportunity, take the platform to kind of indulge in the in talking
Yeah,
about Graceland. So yeah, if
it's
you got,
incredibly indulgent. All of this, it's just terrible. I don't know why anyone would want to hear me talk about this, but um, I think that we've said this. It's definitely a celebration of his love of South African music, and as you said, Matt, like the idea of it being um the cassette that he got was clearly like a sort of lovely catalyst into the world for him, into the world of um, Zulu music, and I think that it's got to be said, like Lady Smith Mountain Buzzard, if you listen to the beginning of Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes, um, that is just, it's sort of just such a wonderful, and that's track 5. In fact, I didn't even have to check on Spotify that it was track 5. I just know it's track 5. That's nice. That's good showing off. But basically you hear, and as we said before, them winning, it's no wonder they won competitions, Lady Smith Mambazo, and Shabalala is the lead singer, but you can hear that sort of, right at the beginning, you can hear the bass frequencies coming from the bass voices, and then the way it blossoms in and halfway through changes. And that's one of the most extraordinary tracks of music I'd ever heard, because I'd heard sort of various bits and bobs of things going around, and some fun pop music and something. But getting in that car and listening to the cassette tape and listening to Diamonds and Souls really hit me. And I was like, oh, this is a whole load of voices from somewhere I don't know where it's from, and it's and then Paul Simon singing over the top of it, and them just absolutely marrying together, and the texture is so beautiful, with really beautiful lyrics as well. And you have like, you sort of have this new world of romance, and these really rich textures coming from Lady Smith Bat Mombazo. So it's really, I recommend this. You know, if no one's ever heard that song before, put on a pair of good headphones and enjoy, because it's just so sort of the spectrum of sounds is, and you've got like, and then you kind of Paul Simon. What I really like about Graceland is that he he essentially, for a lot of his earlier work with Simon Garfunkel and his um solo stuff, he essentially would approach it like he'd write a song with his guitar, and then he'd take it to the studio and then arrange it with session players, or with Simon with Art Garfunkel, and that would be quite a common formula, which is quite a normal formula. But with Graceland, he actually I know that the players he met in South Africa, they actually came up with the parts kind of vaguely instructed by Paul Simon, but he hadn't written the songs. It was the reverse. They played the song and created the backing track first, and then he took a lot of that back to various places and studios in New York and things like that, and sang over them, which is such a reverent way of writing. It's like definitely respecting what they're doing, rather than sort of kind of saying, this is what I want, you have to play it like this. So you can hear that freedom in the album. You can hear that Lady Smith Black Mambazo are laying down this beautiful landscape in a couple of the tracks, where Paul Simon goes, right, that's beautiful, I'm going to lay something down over the top. You can hear it's not been like overthought. It just happens very naturally. And then you've got that kind of gave rise to lyrics. It's like Gumboots, one of the tracks, and Diamonds and Souls of Shoes seem to sort of have a similar theme of kind of, it's like there's a rich woman and a poor man in Diamonds and Souls of Shoes, possibly following on from the Gumboots theme, kind of slightly downtrodden, impoverished characters, like in The Boxer, previous track of Simon Garfunkel's. But like, he makes the sign of a teaspoon, she makes the sign of a wave. The poor boy changes clothes and puts on aftershave to compensate for his ordinary shoes. It's a beautiful line. It's just like, do people write lyrics like that anymore? I'm not sure. And I think that, yeah, that really struck me, as this sort of, these little the whole album as well to me seems like a conversation. It's just like I think he may have said at one point that it was like a play, and that's quite nice. The idea of that there's darkness, but there's also lightness in it as well. Yeah, I mean, I could go on to more tracks, but
Yeah, I think.
don't let me ramble for too long.
No. I think we kind of naturally segued into kind of talking about the tracks, and I didn't even have to do the usual kind of. And now we're going to move on to the track spiel, which so you just like it's like you kind of psychically know where the podcast has to go. But
Okay, that's
yeah,
good.
but yeah, I think particularly like
That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah, I think with like Diamonds and the Soldier shoes, and I think gumboots as well. I think they're about footwear, which is I'm assuming it's a coincidence, but yeah, I think they're kind of talking about kind of like aspects of society. I think particularly kind of like either Western society, but then there's the songs a bit later on where he probably talks about traveling to other societies and being like a stranger and stuff as well, whilst contemplating life and everything. Yeah, there's a very nice story. I mean, how old was he? I mean, how old was he when this came out? He must have been in his 40s by this point, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I was going to say late 30s, but I think it's 40s. Let me check. When was he born? There you go. There you go. It was brought out the year I was born, 1986. So, and he has your birthday, so that's nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, because I don't want to spend too long on it, because I think I've talked about it on an episode that's no longer here. But it's a song that I've loved for like decades, which is "Call Me Al."
Yeah,
"Call Me Al," and this kind of
that's the big one.
Yeah, that's the big one. I've seen covers of it, and I've had friends that cover it, and particularly during shouting really loud the ba 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 to a guy playing it on acoustic to a crowd shouting it back to him and stuff. It's a lovely song, but it's a song as well, which I think, and I'm curious to get your take on this, particularly when you said that it kind of reminds you of childhood as well. There's a lot on here about kind of, particularly in that song, about reaching middle age. Now, say you're 36, I'm 38, and listening to it in the car over the past couple of days, particularly those first two verses, are specifically about aging and growing up, and like there's like the soft in the middle is about gaining weight and not being able to shift it.
Why am I soft in the middle?
Yeah. So, and do you, as you listen to this now as a 36-year-old, are you finding more things to relate to as an adult, particularly when it talks about that?
Yeah, I love that. That's such a wonderful point, and I think it's so easy to overlook the really big hits because, and obviously a really big hit for a reason. I mean, like, yeah, let's look at the lyrics. Call Me Out. Because as a songwriter myself, I kind of do, I do pay attention to lyrics, and I think that Paul Simon is one of my favorite lyricists, and so I think that it's important to kind of, we can read them as poems, and like you were saying, a comment on various things that he would be going through. Like he's, as you said rightly before, his failed marriage with Carrie Fisher, that would have been on his mind, I'm guessing. And as I said before, the conversational aspect of the album is beautiful. It's like the man walks down the street, he says, and immediately gives a character. So he's like, the second line of the first verse is he's going kind of, he says. So instantly we're like hooked in. We're instantly like, oh, what does he say? And why am I soft in the middle? Why am I? The rest of my life is so hard. I need a photo opportunity. I want a shot at redemption. That's quite telling. I want a shot at redemption. So like, did he have some regrets at that point, or did he, feel guilty about doing various things? What's he looking to redeem about his life? So yeah, I totally relate to that.
There's a kind of like, I mean, I'm still about a good half a decade away from being the age he was when this was here, but there's still kind of that kind of midlife crisis aspect to this, which and it's an interesting concept. Not about the song, but like in general, where, and this has been brought up a few times in previous episodes, where you begin to re-listen to albums and you start finding things to relate to.
Oh yeah,
as you're older, particularly if it's an artist, or as you start to reach the age of the artist, and it kind of gives you a reappreciation or
Yes.
you relate to it in a different way, and it kind of extends the life of the album or relevance to it.
I completely agree.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I don't have that relationship with the whole album, but with this song, I remember just really liking the kind of saxophone and the like the
Yeah.
bit. But then as I started listening to the song, I remember having conversations about 10 years ago about yeah, a friend of mine is convinced that the short attention span is actually about his penis, but
Why am I short? Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Short little span of attention. Got
yeah,
it.
or at least,
Yeah, yeah.
or at least having, or well, I say that lightly, but at least having, or it's about the kind of like insecurities of that anyway, as insecurities of that, and I've never been able to get away, but then it's a natural kind of insecurity that people can face. Yeah, it's just as you get older, it's just like all these different things that happen. But then with the third verse, it switches completely, and it talks
Yeah.
about him
Like
traveling.
the third world, he says. Yeah.
Yeah, so is this so? And I'm interested in your take on this, where is it him trying to like, okay, I need to do something different, and this is what happens when he contemplates like, oh, I'm going through a midlife crisis, I need to do something, and is the third verse that, and does that relate to him like?
That's beautiful. I hadn't thought of that, but now, yeah, I think that the way that I see the song "Call Me Out" is it's like it's almost a sort of the confusion of growing older and being like, is this who I want to be? Um, that's super interesting. Yeah, you what is it? A man walks down the street. It's a street in a strange world. Maybe it's the third world. Maybe it's his first time around. Doesn't speak the language. Holds no currency. He's a foreign man. He is surrounded by the sound. Am I getting this right? The sound.
So
Cattle in the marketplace. Scatterings and orphanages. He looks around. Right. Yeah. So he sees angels in the architecture spinning in infinity. He says, "Amen and hallelujah." I think that actually that's such an interesting point that you've said, that it's like he's switched to this slightly existential, which actually happens in the first track as well. I think you could probably liken the third verse, because the boil and the bubble and the babe and the with the baboon heart. It's like, these are the days, lasers in the jungle, lasers in the staccato signals of constant information, a loose affiliation of millionaires and billionaires, and baby, these are the days of wonder. This is a long distance call. The way the camera follows us in slow mo, the way we look to us all, the way we look to a distant constellation that's dying in the corner of the sky. These are the days of miracles and wonder. And don't cry, baby, don't cry. That's very That's the first track, I believe, and that's very. Thank you for listening to that. Like, literally, I remember that whole song, and remember when I was 8 years old, being like, what the F triple asterisk does that mean? But now it's like a sort of, it's like, I think often when perhaps potentially people like ourselves are faced with the midlife crisis age, we do turn to the heavens. And I could, that's what it means to me. And Paul Simon definitely is kind of addressing the status quo there, being like, wow, technology's moving fast.
yeah,
Like, the way the camera follows us in slow mo, that's like you and me saying, oh god, the iPhone's getting pretty good, isn't it? And
there's
to be very unromantic in an analogous way there, but
yeah, there's I think Jack Dorsey Quartz, a contributor on Genius, has just posted a very
yes,
interesting comment about The Boy in the Bubble, saying that the lyrics describe the anxiety of postmodern alienation very well.
there you go.
And yeah, and linking back to, I think, the fact that this was perhaps after he'd split up after he'd separated from Carrie Fisher, he's in his early 40s, and kind of single, and again, and this was like the mid 80s, so this was what, 84, 85. That 85 was the year I was born. There was like, and we was talking about the globalness of the internet kind of almost shrinking the world, and like bringing people together and stuff. There's no internet. There's like, so it must be very isolating, an isolating place, because I mean, for as much grief as the internet gets and social media, there's still kind of online communities that people can connect to, or the opportunities are there. Whereas with this, the boy in the bubble, for example, the boy in his own, trapped in his own bubble, away from everyone else. There's just like an image of someone who's just found themselves on their own and having to kind of deal with that.
Yeah, the magnitude of being alone.
Yeah,
Sure.
and it dates quite well. I mean, so it
Yeah,
dates quite well because it's about those thoughts and feelings rather than situations. So it
that was
doesn't.
lit. Oh, I completely agree. And sorry to cut you off. That was
No, no.
literally the same. That was the same thought that I had too. Actually, when I was thinking about meeting you on online today, I was thinking about how quite ahead of its time the Boy in the Bubbles lyrics are. Him just talk in terms of just talking about the camera following us in slow mo. Him gazing at the sort of slightly chaotic um numerousness of things happening around him and perhaps being overwhelmed by it. And that, as you just said, is so relatable today with AI and with the internet and with like, what are we supposed to think? How are we supposed to behave? What, you know, I think the internet can bring us incredible things, but it can also be a big source of anxiety. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I think this record, the lyrics in this record travel really well, as you've just said. I couldn't agree more. And that's super interesting. So going back to the third verse of um, "Call Me Out," which is what you beautifully kind of draw our attention to. I think that there are a lot of little hints in this album that link in, like Gumboots. Perhaps the theme in Gumboots is similar to the theme in "Soles of Our Shoes." I'm talking lyrically here, and perhaps the theme in the third verse of "Call Me Out" relates to the same kind of fragile frame of mind he was in when he was
Hmm.
writing "Boy in the Bubble." So
Yeah,
I think it's a super interesting thing for perhaps gentlemen of our age or women of our age
yeah,
to be looking at.
exactly. As I'm just keeping an eye on time, we've probably got time just to briefly mention a couple more songs. So if there's any
Yeah,
that,
please do.
if there's any that you need to kind of vent out or,
You
or
just need
talk
to
about,
get out.
yeah,
I think that I won't say too much about Under African Skies other than it's just a very it's just a very beautiful song, and I suggest everybody puts it on. It's the one that comes after "You Can Call Me Out," and then I think track 8 is "Homeless," which is with Ladysmith Black Mambazo, and they're really the sort of central. They are the star of that song, "Homeless," and I heard them sing that live in Basingstoke. Unfortunately, Basingstoke. I wish it had been, in that would have been, it would be nice to be in South Africa and hear them outdoors, perhaps, or in a more magical setting. But I happened to be
hmm,
in the Anvil in Basingstoke.
yeah,
Well, I was with my brother, so that was nice because we got to enjoy that, and we both listened to Graceland in the car. But yeah, "Homeless" is an incredible display of what Lady Smith Black Mambazo can do, and not to mention the incredibly poignant theme, which I won't touch on anymore, but we have acknowledged it earlier.
yeah. But yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think it's as you said, it's the kind of, if not the centerpiece of the album, but at least it's a strong kind of focus um
Yeah.
on
Well,
the,
and also another wonderful thing of Paul Simon. I hope people agree with me. Gracefully joining a South African band in terms of on the microphones, and it's a really tricky topic to talk about because of the
yeah,
controversy. But in terms of music, it's just I feel like there's a respect for one another. I can't speak for that time. I can't speak for 1986. I don't know what was going on in the studio at the time, but I feel that you can hear something very beautiful happening. The marriage of his voice and their voices, there's something incredibly special about it. And the percussive element to their a cappella conversation with each other is nothing short of magical for me.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Just on a
It's
sonic level. I mean,
yeah, I think it's like one of the kind of instances of the album, like showcasing this is what this is what this part of the world is capable of doing,
absolutely,
and
he put them on the map in a sense, which is
yeah,
potentially a controversial thing to say, but he did. He made them international with that album.
I think if you move on to perhaps talking about the kind of reception of the album, so yeah, the
Yeah, I
album,
mean that's something that you're probably more erudite. As I say, it's I really do just enjoy the I'm not au fait on the history of how it was received, other than just me in a car.
yeah,
But I'm very happy for you to take the lead on that one, if you don't mind.
yeah. So initial reviews are positive, positive. Yeah, on again as always, as I glance over to onto the professional rating section of Wikipedia. Sometimes some episodes are able to do there's a lot of stars on this. So yeah, there's 5 out
yeah.
of 5 for all music. American Songwriter 5 out of 5. Blender 5 out of 5. Christo's Record Guide is an A, and Robert Christo has often been quite very vicious towards some of the albums and stuff. Entertainment Weekly, A. Independent 5 out of 5. Rolling Stone 5 out of 5. Rolling Stone Album Guide 5 out of 5. Uncut 10 out of 10. And as always, I've got to bring up Pitchfork because the Pitchfork scores are usually quite funny. Pitchfork gave it 9.2, which is, I think,
yeah, that's so Pitchfork. That's so Pitchfork.
Yeah, but then it's still not it's not the highest because I'm pretty sure Doolittle by the Pixies got 10 out of 10, which is I think is still the highest that we've had.
Yeah,
Pitchfork review.
There's Pitchfork review.
Yeah, it's nowhere near the lowest. Yeah, the lowest review, the lowest Pitchfork reviewed album covered on the podcast is Mika Live on Cartoon Motion. They gave it 1.5.
Still, a cheeky 5.
Yes, yeah,
he would have held on to that 5.5.
Yeah, but retrospect. But what's quite funny as well is that there's at the time, so the initial reviews from the time, really well, but retrospectively, I think people have kind of when they've retrospectively revisited the album, have either reappraised it and gave it even more kudos as it's gone on. So All Music Williams Ruhlman said that Graceland became. All Music's William Ruhlman said that Graceland became the standard against which subsequent musical experiments by major artists were measured. Joe Tangari of Pitchfork wrote that its songs transcend the context as listening experiences. These songs are astute and exciting, spit-shined with the gloss of production that bears a lot of hallmarks of the era, but somehow has refused to age. Taken as a whole, the album offers tremendous insight in how we live our world and how that changes as we get older. And BBC Music said it'll probably stand as a pinnacle of his remarkable half-century career. And just all sorts of kind of loads of the stuff. It won quite a lot of accolades as well. So it was the album of the year for the Village Voice. The NME gave it 6. Was 6 in the NME's albums of the year of 1996.
Oh, nice! I love that. Yeah.
Rolling Stone in 1987 put it 56 in the best albums of the last 20 years. And in 1989 put it in the 100 best albums of the 80s. So
nice.
Apparently there was 49 songs from the 70s that that were above it in things. So Guardian put it 69 in the 100 best albums ever in 97. Loads and loads. So in 2003, 26 in the top 40 albums of all time from USA Today. Rolling Stone, 81 in the 500 greatest albums of all time in 2003. In 2020, in 2020's version of the 500 greatest albums of all time, it rose to 46.
No, I like that. A little cheeky rise.
Yeah, so it pretty much went from 81 to 46. It won Grammy, so it won the album of the year in 1987. And then Graceland won record of the year in 1988.
I've got to be honest with you. I didn't know any of this, and it genuinely is just has been my favorite album since I was a nipper. So it's nice to hear that though. It's nice to hear that because we do live in an age of numbers and ratings. Fortunately and unfortunately, obviously ratings can be super helpful when you and I want to go to the cinema. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear the Guardian put it in their top 100. That's sort of that kind of makes me feel aligned, to what I read the Guardian. It's like I trust the Guardians. They've got some great musical.
Yeah, exactly. Same.
They've got some good insight.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, that's okay. You're like, okay, that's a staple thing.
Yeah. And in terms of sales, it went to 14 million worldwide, 5 times platinum in the US, doing 5 million.
Loving this. You're loving these the metrics.
Yeah. In the UK, it went 8 times platinum.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense.
2.4 million. Germany 3 times gold. Australia 8 times platinum. France platinum for 300,000. South Africa it went 3 times platinum with 150 100,000 units sold. Brazil 100,000, gold in Italy, platinum in Netherlands, Spain platinum, Switzerland platinum, New Zealand platinum,
Wow.
Denmark
Wow.
gold. So it's done really well. It's not the most sold album that we've covered on the podcast. I think 21 by Adele still has that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's still up there as perhaps one of the more successful albums we've covered on this podcast, and it said like its kind of influence, kind of unparalleled, as well as opening like the Western world to South African music.
Yeah. Well done, Dad. Then I'll tell him.
If only you knew what he'd hope.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah.
Pandora's lovely box.
Now, have you ever seen Paul Simon live?
Yeah, once. So just very, very indulgently, I'll just quick. I had a really bad motorcycle accident in 2011, and this is the context of it. And I couldn't walk for a couple of years, and was in crutches when I went to Hyde Park, 2012, to watch Paul Simon. And he had some of the original players. I can't tell you who because my brain is terrible with names. But he had some of the original backing band from South Africa. I mean, like 5 of the 40 who were on the record.
Yeah.
But and it was glorious. And I was quite far back, but I had an extraordinary time at Hyde Park. It was a beautiful evening. It didn't rain. And yeah, I cried. Then it changed my life. I laughed, I cried. Then I actually ended up meeting some musicians, and they took me in a camper van, and we went back to some random place in the countryside and recorded some songs. I'm still in touch with them, and so I've sort of always remembered that as like almost the spirit of Paul Simon just living into that night. And it's a memorable night, mainly because of Paul Simon, but also it's just one of those nights that really kind of went on forever. I spent 24 hours with these people, and we bonded over all of the Paul Simon songs, and it was a very special evening.
Is that the kind? Because you mentioned that Paul Simon influenced your writing. Do you think that was perhaps like the moment of the gig where you kind of realised that it did, or was that one of the first instances that you realised that, or do you think was he always there? Or
Really good question. I think actually when I went traveling, my brother, who's also in music, he made me a really lovely playlist which had Neil Young, Simon Garfunkel, solo Paul Simon, all kinds of like lots of different artists on it. And actually he was probably going through a lot of like some solo John Lennon as well. So I think he was going through like a sort of people who've once been in bands solo phase. But he threw in some good stuff, like Stevie Wonder. He threw in lots of different other types of kind of other types, other genres, there was some rap in there was all kinds of things. It was nice as a sort of thing to listen to. And when I was in a hospital eventually, and I was listening to a lot of Paul Simon, and I was listening to a lot of Bowie, and that's when actually where's that? Here it is. Station. I started listening to Golden Years that was one of the tracks off Station to Station, David Bowie, and that was the thing that made me want to become a professional musician. So it was artists like Paul Simon rediscovering them later on. I think that the thing that really speaks to me, and it probably speaks to millions, is that his voice is so beautiful and the lyrics are really good. So it's like that as a songwriter or as a listener, that's kind of the dream. It's like if you think about how catchy You Can Call Me Al is, but you could turn to your mate, and you were saying about your friend and his interpretation of one of those lyrics in particular, which I enjoy. Like you can turn to your mate in the pub and sing those lyrics with him. It's that lovely kind of conversational long verses where you'd probably be able to remember quite a few lyrics from Call Me Al. They might be burned into your long-term memory, and to be able to release a record with those kind of songs, I think has always been my dream. And I will never ever meet the prowess of Paul Simon, but he's certainly incredibly inspiring. It's just that combo of like very, very catchy melody with just almost sort of near perfect lyrics in some of the tracks.
Okay. So if people who are listening to this and they listen to Graceland for the first time by Paul Simon, where would you recommend that they go to next in his discography? Do you recommend go forward, go backward, or
listen to Bookends, listen to all of Simon and Garfunkel, listen to Bridge Over Troubled Water, and listen to Still Crazy after these years, and give Hearts and Bones a listen as well, because there's some really lovely witty sounds on there, and heartfelt lyrics. I think it's important to just sort of trust your gut. I think that he hasn't made any like awful records,
Okay,
in my
so
opinion.
okay. So we're here with the very important question of the podcast now, which is the song for the Spotify Hall of Fame playlist. Now, if anyone's not listened to this before, what this is, I'm going to ask Jonny to pick one song from this album to be immortalised forever on this playlist. Now, I can't veto it. Whatever Jonny says goes. So, Jonny, which song are you going to pick to go onto the playlist?
For this reason, I think him marrying together the Ladysmith Black Mambazo and him together, I will go with Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes, which he just absolutely smashed it out, and also he did write it with Joseph Shabalala, so I think there's a nice symbolism there.
Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes. It becomes the latest song to go onto the Spotify Hall of Fame playlist. Following songs that I can't mention yet because I'm actually because I'm recording this way in advance, so so I can't usually do what I usually do on this section. But so that joins onto that. So, Jonny, we're now reaching the end of our conversation. So, first of all, I will brief shout out to Hannah at Lash Media for connecting us in the first place. So, so she originally emailed, so she's the reason that we're talking. So, I want to say thank you to Hannah.
Thanks, Hannah.
If people want to find you, look at your projects, listen to what you're doing at the moment, where can people find you?
Yeah, sure. They can find me at Montrell Band, which is MONTRELL.band on Instagram, and also The Horn Band, which is as you'd expect. So yeah, with The Horn, we supported Scouting for Girls in November, and that was a cracking one, really fun.
Yeah, and lots of stories that you obviously you can obviously recall.
Exactly.
Yeah, not revealing this is recorded way in advance. So that is it. We are now at the very end of the episode. So, Jonny, I was going to say thank you ever so much for coming onto the podcast and getting me to listen to Graceland.
I'm touched that you put it in my hands to be able to explain that album to you, and I hope I've done even 2% of my part to recommend that album. But go and listen to it and enjoy it.
You've been listening to Pick a Disc, and I've been your host, Matthew Latham. Our theme music is Pump by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Pick a Disc is hosted by the We Made This podcast network, and you can find them on www.spreaker.com/user/WeMadeThis. You can find the Pick a Disc show site on www.spreaker.com/show/pickadisc. You can find us on all the usual social media type places like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter under Pick a Disc. You can also email us on pickadisc@gmail.com. Until next time, happy listening to all those discs that you are picking. Goodbye.
If I asked you to think about Japanese movies, what do you picture? Anime, no doubt. You think of the beautifully rendered works of Studio Ghibli. Maybe you picture Godzilla and his coterie of city-ravaging kaiju. Perhaps you see Toshido Mifune wandering the countryside and armed with only his wit and his blade. And I know you're trying not to think about the pale-faced ghost with long hair and creepy noises. And maybe you're a fan of the exploitation type of cinema, where schoolgirls wield chainsaws and machine guns with abandon. My name's Perry Constantine. I'm an author and a teacher, and back when I was in college, I had the exact same image of Japanese films as you did. It was my love and interest in these movies that led me to move to Japan. Now, almost 20 years later, I'm still here, and teaching classes about Japanese film. What I've learned in that time is that Japanese movies are so much more diverse than just anime or kaiju or samurai. Sure, those movies are fun, but by exploring the wide range of Japanese cinema, there's so much we can learn about Japanese history, society, and culture. That's why I started Japan on Film. In each episode, I'm joined by a different guest to help me spotlight just some of these excellent movies. We'll be watching the good, the bad, the popular, and the bizarre. Come along with us on a journey into the wide, wonderful, and sometimes very weird world of Japanese cinema. Listen to the Japan on Film podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and visit our website, japanonfilm.com.